there we go. Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at learning objective 3. Why was Susan B. Anthony arrested? Right, spoiler alert for voting. Describe Anthony's trial. What was she hoping to achieve with her trial? What was NAWSA? And describe NAWSA. What was achieved December 10th, 1869, and why was it achieved? So proceed from here. Let me okay. How do I? Oh yeah, I gotta go here. Share video, and voting is a crime. That's what we're watching today. Okay, away we go. So like yesterday, I'm going to go through this video. I'll pause it here and there to elaborate, to provide some clarification as we go forward. And Tanya, you're the only person here. So if you do have any questions, just turn on your mic as we're going. If you need clarification or if you need to push pause, if you didn't hear a word correctly, or you wanted a word defined or a concept clarified, or an event clarified, whatever the case may be.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go from here.
When women cast the ballot, have power as in the home, and have the right to ballot for home and liberty, let the suffrage cause march on.
In 1872, the radical wing of the women's movement used the presidential election to challenge the Constitution.
Every southern state.
In defiance of the law, hundreds of women went to the polls to vote, arguing that as American citizens, it was their given right.
Till the suffrage cause is won.
November 5th, 1872. Dear Mrs. Stanton, well, I have been and gone and done it. Positively voted for Grant and the Republican ticket straight. This a.m. at 7 o'clock, and swore my vote in at that. I hope you too voted. Yours, Susan B. Anthony.
In Rochester, Anthony had led a dozen women, including her elderly mother and 3 sisters, to the polling place at a local barber shop. She had intimidated the young registrars into letting them vote. 4 hours later, a U.S. Marshal came to the home Anthony shared with her sister, with a warrant for her arrest. Anthony demanded to be handcuffed before being led away. Newspapers pounced on the story.
So that's a good question. Why would she want to be handcuffed, right? And so this gets into the role of what she's assumed, right? She is a woman suffragist, and behind that, she's an activist, right? And so what she is doing here is publicly showing everybody the what she's willing to endure, right? To get conversations going, to elicit sympathy for her cause, and to get people who might even disagree with her just to keep talking about it, because eventually that logic is going to turn on them, right? There's really no argument against this within the context of, you know, some of the guiding principles of American law, its founding documents, the Constitution and its various amendments, including the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, even though at this point it says that a natural-born citizen is a male inhabitant, right? Clearly, what we're looking at is the only reason why women are being prevented from voting is out of outdated stereotypes, right? This is their argument, at least, right? Lots of people at this time, including women, disagree with them. But whether people agree, whether people disagree, the point is to display this public demonstration of suffering in front of other people to get the conversation going.
One wrote, Miss Anthony is a culprit who pretends she is a martyr.
Right. And that's right there, that criticism of her, right? Look at her. She's trying to be a martyr. That's somebody that disagrees with her. That's exactly what Susan B. Anthony wants, right? She would rather have everybody agree with her. But, you know, at the very, yeah. What's your question, Tanya? Why was she the only one arrested? No, there were others arrested as well. They're just focusing on Susan B. Anthony.
The fact that Anthony was arrested was, as they say, no accident. She was notorious by this time. And the fact that this was a federal crime and a U.S. Marshal arrested her, to me, indicates that there was a pretty high-level decision to prosecute her, I believe, with the idea that if they could stop Anthony from voting, they would stop this whole movement.
Hear ye, hear ye.
4 months later, the now infamous Susan B. Anthony was tried before a federal judge for the crime of voting.
Miss Susan B. Anthony. All rise.
And this courtroom was filled with very important people. This trial was of nationwide significance. The media was there. The women of the movement were there, as well as the all-male jury, the judge, and the lawyers.
The defendant, Miss Susan B. Anthony, did not...
Anthony was not allowed to be a witness in her own trial. She was, because she was a woman, declared incompetent to testify in her own behalf.
If the same act had been done by her brother, it would have been honorable.
In this very same day that the trial began, the judge took from his pocket the decision.
So that's something that women's rights activists are fighting at this time, right? Literally, if you're accused of a crime, brought to court, today, it's just kind of assumed that you can testify on your own behalf. Legally speaking, she cannot, right?
That he had written, which he read to the court, finding her guilty of voting and instructing the jury,
gentlemen of the jury,
this all-male jury, of course,
under the
to
Constitution,
find her
Miss
guilty
Anthony
of
was not
voting.
protected in a right to vote, and I therefore direct you to find a verdict of guilty.
Anthony, as you can imagine, was writhing with anger and indignation. This went far beyond being denied the right to vote and being arrested for voting. She wasn't even getting a full trial. And then the judge says, does the prisoner have anything to say before sentence is passed? And that opened the floodgates.
Yes, Your Honor. In your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights.
The prisoner has been tried according to established forms of law.
I have been tried by law made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, in favor of men, and against women.
The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the costs of the prosecution.
May it please Your Honor, I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. Resistance to tyranny is obedience to God.
Let's read through this. Yes, Your Honor, I have many things to say. For your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored, robbed of fundamental privilege of citizenship. I am degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject, right? And that's key, right? This is really is throwing in the face of everything that the American government and its citizens have claimed that differentiates themselves from the old world, right? The old world of the monarchs, right? This idea of the monarchs rule with absolute authority, and people who reside there are subjects of that monarch, right? And what Susan B. Anthony is doing here is demonstrating the lie of the values of American democracy and representative government when it comes to women during this time period, and demonstrating that under the judge's interpretation of the law, how the law is executed, and the customs that uphold that law, indeed, women are subjects rather than citizens in the United States of America. Citizens, and not only myself individually, but all of my sex are, by your honor's verdict, doomed to political subjugation under this so-called form of government. And then this is Judge Hunt's interpretation. The court cannot listen to a rehearsal of arguments. The prisoner's counsel has already consumed 3 hours in presenting. So it's basically saying that you're filibustering this court, you're just stalling, right? And we're going to have to move on. And then, so she continues, right? May it please your honor, I am not arguing the question, but simply stating the reasons why sentence cannot in justice be pronounced against me. Your denial of my citizen's right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed, right? And this is a guiding principle founded in the Declaration of Independence, couched in enlightened philosophy from John Locke, right? So what she's basically pointing out there is this Lockean philosophy that the Declaration of Independence basically was inspired by. John Locke was a philosopher that wrote in the late 1600s, about 100 years before the Declaration of Independence. And he looked at government and he said, well, what do we have this thing for, right? Why do we have these people telling us what to do? Is this thing necessary? And he came to the argument that, well, yeah, it's a necessary evil. And so otherwise, right, we would have chaos. We would just have people doing whatever they wanted to do, right? And so it provides order to the darker forces of humanity, right, if we will. But if we're going to have a government, John Locke argued, we have to have a government that the people living in consent to, right? And so if you don't consent to it, based by the fact that the government violates your natural rights, then that government by definition is illegitimate. And this is what she's pointing out here. Is the denial of my right to consent as one of the governed, the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my right to a trial by a jury of my peers, right? The people, they're all men, right? They're all people that definitely do not agree with women's suffrage as an offender against the law, therefore the denial of my sacred rights to life, liberty, and property, right? And that verbatim is she is quoting John Locke, right? So that's part of that is in the Declaration of Independence, right? We have inalienable rights. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those were Thomas Jefferson's words. He's using John Locke's philosophy there, but she's basically, what she's pointing out here is that John Locke was pointing out that as just a human being, you're born to a right to your life. You're born with a right to your freedom, your liberty. You are born to a right to your things, right? People with power, people with government can't just take your things away from you, right? And the fact that she is facing prison is a violation of all of these things that have no basis in a legitimate government, is Susan B. Anthony's argument at this time. And this is the judge here. So he continues basically to interrupt her, like, you basically, be quiet, lady. I don't want to keep hearing you talk about this, but she keeps interjecting as Judge Hunt is trying to make her be quiet, right? But Your Honor will not deny me this one and only poor privilege of protest against this high-handed outrage upon my citizens' rights. May it please the court to remember that since the day of my arrest last November, this is the first time that either myself or any person of my disenfranchised class has been allowed a word of defense before a judge or jury, right? Just give me this at least, judge, is what she's saying. Let me talk. So again, the judge these are transcripts, basically. The judge is like banging the gavel as this is going on, right? Be quiet, right? And she just keeps filibustering, right? She keeps talking. All of my prosecutors, from the 8th Ward corner grocery politician who entered the complaint to the United States Marshal, Commissioner, District Attorney, the District Judge, Your Honor on the bench, she's pointing her finger at him, not one is my peer, but each and all are my political sovereigns, right? My rulers. And had Your Honor submitted my case to the jury, as was clearly your duty, even then I should have had just cause of protest, for not one of those men was my peer. But native or foreign born, white or black, rich or poor, educated or ignorant, awake or asleep, sober or drunk, each and every man of them was my political superior. Hence, in no sense, my peer, right? Since they have all of the rights, they have all, and women have no rights whatsoever. By definition, no matter who is on the jury, by the fact that they are men during this time period, makes them superior to women. Even under such circumstances, a commoner of England tried before a jury of lords would have far less cause to complain than should I, a woman, tried before a jury of men. Even my counsel, the Honorable Henry S. Selden, her lawyer, who has argued my cause so ably, so earnestly, so unanswerably before Your Honor, is my political sovereign. So even this guy who's done a bang-up job, she's saying, he is more powerful than me, precisely, politically speaking. Precisely as no disenfranchised person is entitled to sit upon a jury, and no woman is entitled to the franchise. So, franchise meaning vote. So none but a regularly admitted lawyer is allowed to practice in the courts, and no woman can gain admission to the bar, right? Jury, judge, counsel must be of the superior class, right? So no women are allowed to be lawyers at this time, you know, and if you are in trouble with the law, it does make sense to find a lawyer that can empathize with your plight to some extent, right? You know, this lawyer might be very competent, he might know what he's doing, but by just definition of his existence within this time period and the political circumstances, there's no way you can empathize with what she's going through. So he continues to interrupt her. She continues when, oops, let me go back just a second here so I can read that. There we go. When I was brought before Your Honor for trial, I hoped for a broad and liberal interpretation of the Constitution and its recent amendments that should declare equality of rights to national guarantee to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, right? She's quoting the 14th Amendment there, but failing to get this justice, failing even to get a trial by jury, not of my peers, I ask not leniency at your hands, but rather full rigor of the law, right? She's asking, okay, you think I did the crime? Give it to me, right? Throw the book at me, right? Ask yourself why she might be asking for the fullest extent of punishment right now. The court must insist, George Hunt says. He's trying to keep her quiet. She is not going to be quiet, right? Finally, Anthony sat down, only to be immediately ordered by the judge to rise again. Hunt pronounced the sentence. The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the cost of the prosecution. So he's not throwing the book at her, right? Although $100 back then would have been quite a bit of money, but she's not going to be sent to prison. And so she responds, may it please Your Honor, I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. All the stock and trade I possess is a $10,000 debt incurred by publishing my paper, The Revolution, 4 years ago, the sole object of which was to educate all women to do precisely as I have done. rebel against your man-made, unjust, unconstitutional forms of law that tax, fine, imprison, and hang women while they deny them the right of representation in government. And I shall work on with might and main to pay every dollar of that honest debt, but not a penny shall go to this unjust claim. And I shall earnestly and persistently continue to urge all women to the practical recognition of the old revolutionary maxim that, quote, resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. Right? So she's really pushing back against this and saying, I'm not going to comply. I'm not going to pay any fine from this court since I find this court to be illegitimate. Judge Hunt, in a move calculated to preclude any appeal to the higher court,
Anthony
dismissed the court, right? Said, okay, you're not going to pay it. You're dismissed. This whole case is dismissed, right? And that's going to really anger her. And in fact, one thing that had happened that the documentary doesn't talk about is that she was arrested, right? She's sent to jail, and she wanted to stay there, but an uncle of hers bailed her out. That made her angry, but okay, she's bailed out. And now the court has dismissed this case. Right? She's not going to pay the fine, so I'm going to dismiss this case. And it was a basically slap in the face to Susan B. Anthony because the judge realizes what she is doing. She's trying to create this attention towards her cause, to garner sympathy, to get people who might disagree with women's suffrage to maybe question, well, what the heck's going on here? Why is this woman rotting in a prison just because she wanted to vote, right? The judge isn't going to give her that. And the fact that it's being denied will, the court is this case is being dismissed by the judge, robs her of the ability to appeal it to a higher court, right? That was her hope, to take it to the Supreme Court and have the Supreme Court argue this. And whether the Supreme argued women should have the right to vote or shouldn't have the right to vote would amplify this conversation on a national stage, right? The judge is going to give her that.
He wanted to appeal to the United States Supreme Court, but was blocked on a technicality. A year later, the High Court heard a similar case. The justices declared unanimously that while the U.S. Constitution made women citizens, only the individual states could give them the right to vote.
Which is a strange argument. Now, prior to the 14th Amendment, that's a legitimate argument, right? The states under the 10th Amendment remain sovereign as far as deciding who could vote, who could not vote, and all of that kind of stuff. But the 14th Amendment took that away from the states and saying that, hey, you can talk about the age you're gonna have people vote. You guys can organize how people are going to vote, pick which day people are going to vote, all of that, right? You have all the administrative rights on voting within your state boundaries, but you cannot deny people the right to vote based on the 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, based on former servitude and race, right? And that's the first time the federal government is stepping in, setting the precedent, saying, no, we're taking part of that power that the state has away from you. And so this is a very convenient argument that they're bringing up here that, oh, it's always up to the states, when the federal government has already said that, hey, we have the power to pick and choose what the states can do when it comes to voting with the 15th Amendment.
Now we are forced to beg at the feet of each individual male voter in every state.
So take note, Minor and Happersett of 1875, right? That's a significant court case, which should be in your response, right? This is something that basically said that the federal government has basically said the states get to decide who gets to vote, who doesn't get to vote when it comes to women voting. And most states aren't going to go with this. So this is basically rubber stamping at the federal level that women will be continued the right to vote.
State. Well, we must buckle on our armor and organize wherever the battle for the ballot for woman is to be fought.
Over the following years, Stanton and Anthony campaigned from Maine to California, giving thousands of women the courage to organize. By 1890, they were reunited with Lucy Stone and merged their organizations. But after 40 years of work, the leaders could only point to a single victory.
So just to underscore, in the last video, we're talking about a split of the vote between the women's suffrage movement as a result of the 14th and 15th Amendment that gave Black men the right to vote and not women, right? And so people like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, no, if anybody's going to have the right to vote, it should be women first, right? And people like Lucy Stone said, of course, women should have the right to vote, but this is a step forward. We should be in solidarity with Black men when it comes to this. Let's not only support the 15th Amendment, but organize to make sure that that law is going to be enforced. So the states and vigilantes in those states do not find ways of denying the Black men the right to vote, right? And so the split, the leadership in 1890, right? This is all, they're going to come together, right? And forget their differences over about 20 years, right? So this was the American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Suffrage Association. Those two groups are coming together to form the new group, the NAWSA, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which is going to be the national association that will oversee strategy all the way up until 1920, when the 19th Amendment is ratified.
The Wyoming Territory had granted its few women the right to vote and had entered the Union as the first and only suffrage state.
So take note of that. Wyoming is the first state to guarantee a woman's right to vote in 1869. And a lot of the first states that guarantee a woman's right to vote in this country are coming from the West. Keep in mind, these are former territories, and they are seeking statehood, right? They want to be admitted to the Union as states. And one of the ways that some of these territories enticed people to populate their territories, because one of the processes to become a state is you have to cross a certain threshold of population, 100,000, right? Was to say, hey, if you guys move out here, women will have the right to vote. And so this incentivized people to settle in their territories to some extent. So we got Western states led a nation in approving women's suffrage, but some of them had rather unsavory motives. Though some men recognized the important role women played in the frontier settlement, others voted for women's suffrage only to bolster the strength of conservative voting blocs, which is basically saying that women are still being subservient to their husbands, right? And not being protected under the law when it comes to domestic disputes and abuse. If a husband is telling his wife, you better vote this way and that way, right? It's only bolstering that type of vote in the first place. And this is what was the motivation for this in a lot of ways. In Wyoming, some men were also motivated by sheer loneliness in 1869. The territory had over 6,000 adult males, and this is the idea of getting people to come out, and only 1,000 females. And area men hoped women would be more likely to settle in the rugged and isolated country if they were granted the right to vote. So some of the suffrage movement's leaders did have more respectable reasons for supporting women's right to vote. William Bright, a territorial legislator who was in his mid-40s, had a persuasive young wife who convinced him that denying women the vote was a gross injustice. The other major backer, Edward M. Lee, the territorial secretary who had championed the cause for years, argued that it was unfair for his mother to be denied a privilege granted to African American males, right? And do take note of this, right? This is going to be, you'll see that a similar thing happen in Iron-Jawed Angels with the passage of the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment, as you're going to see in Iron-Jawed Angels, which is the basis of Learning Objective 6, barely passed. It passed, in fact, by one vote. And that vote was a vote in the state legislature of Tennessee, right? So just to give you an overview of how an amendment comes to the Constitution, Congress passes the amendment in Congress, right? And then it has to go to the states. And 2/3 of every state legislature has to vote in the affirmative if that amendment is going to pass or deny it, right? And it looked like the 19th Amendment was going to fail in 1920. And there was a guy named Harry Burns who was serving the state legislature. He was planning on voting against the 19th Amendment, but he got a telegraph from his mother. And his mother said, you better do the right thing and give Miss Cat, what she wants. And Carrie Cat, as you'll learn, it was one of the major leaders in the suffrage movement during the Progressive era. And he changed his mind, right? Ultimately, though appeals to justice and equality did not pass the legislation, most Wyoming legislators supported Bright and Lee's bill because they thought it would win the territory free national publicity and might attract more single marriageable women to the region. Territorial government John A. Campbell appreciated the publicity power of the policy and signed the bill into law, making women the first territory of the state in the history of the nation to grant women this fundamental right on December 10th, 1869. Again, too, the benefit too here is it's bringing more people into the state. It's not just bringing women in the state, but people in general, in order for this state to be able to apply to the United States as a state, from shifting from a territory to a state. All right, so that's learning objective 3. Any questions at all before we move on to learning objective 4, which let me okay. So 1 second here. What I would encourage you to do too is to watch this video here. It's just a reenactment of the trial, just to give it a little bit more life of that Susan B. Anthony had to endure. A couple of actors here reading through the transcripts and in a theatrical way. So that's what this video is right here. But we're going to move on to learning objective 4. I'm going to stop recording